Cold. That was the first thing he felt, his body previously motionless and numb. Suddenly he awoke. His eyes widened as he gasped in the surprise and pain. He tried to move, but his arms are tied behind the chair that he was sitting in. Ice water dripped down his body, and after a punch hit him in the face, blood had also dripped down the side of his mouth. He grunted slightly and shook his head, feeling his senses return slowly. His eyes focused on the bandages around his naked torso, as well as the bandages on his leg. Despite the pain he felt, clearly someone had treated his injuries to some degree, considering that he had taken that herbal mixture. Apparently, they even put his nose back in place. He could still feel one of the bullets stuck in his body, however. The slight twinges of pain appeared in several areas. His hair was then pulled violently, forcing him to raise his head. With a grunt, he looked over to where he was now. A gray room with a single lamp that served as illumination just above his head. The room was empty except for the single table to the left, close to the wall with some utensils they thought they were torture tools. How wonderful. In front of him was a man, the prisoner director Herc. He was wearing a social shirt with his sleeves folded up to his elbow. He had short brown hair with the same color of eyes. His arms were resting on his legs, and he kept a neutral expression. But Ghost did tell, his gaze showed interest. It's good that you're finally awake. Sorry for the rough treatment and the Spartan accommodations, but you shouldn't be here, Herc began, propping both elbows on his thighs, leaning his body against slightly forward, still maintaining eye contact. However, Ghost just huffed. I think we're both in the wrong place. You're still alive, the agent said. A small sideways smile was born on his lips. In response, he began to receive a punch to the face, making him grunt in pain, but that still didn't make him take that smile off of his lips. Great to know that you have a sense of humor, although we all know it won't last long. Let's cut to the chase, shall we? You probably already know how this works. I ask, you answer. Who sent you? Again, Ghost snorted and shook his head. Well, you must already suspect. Heck, I won't say anything, Ghost said, keeping his eye contact with Herc for a few moments. Until then, the man lowered his eyes to Ghost's torso, analyzing those long-healed scars. That's quite a scar. It's pretty clear to me that you have pure involvement with biological weapons, huh? Do you fight them? But it's not clear what organization you're from? BSAA, FBC, USSOCOM? No identification, that is, puzzles me, Herc said, leaning his back on his chair and crossing his arms. Ghost also reclined from his chair, feeling the cuffs around his hands. He could get those out of those cuffs. All he had to do was dislocate a few fingers, but not with those two men behind him. They would need to see the movement and, most of all, hear the sound of his bones being dislocated. Herc sighed and nodded as to the two men. Ghost was already suddenly pulled up. One of them landed a punch to his stomach, hitting him straight in the gut that caused him to buckle in pain. He was also pulled back heavily and forced to lie down, what appeared to be a stretcher that was behind where he was sitting. What I mean is, you must already realize, right? Those were not normal guards, Herc said, watching his men hit a few punches to his face, his torso, and his stomach of the new prisoner. Herc sighed and nodded to the two men. Ghost was suddenly pulled out, and one of them landed a soft punch to his stomach, hitting him straight in the gut, causing him to buckle in pain. He was suddenly pulled back heavily and forced to lie down what appeared to be something. Ghost gritted his teeth and endured the pain. He didn't even grunt anymore. His expression was sharp, and despite the blows, he kept silent, looking back at his attackers, memorizing the faces down to the last detail. Pain was his companion on lonely nights. This might be his injuries to his body, but they certainly didn't hurt him. I could think of only two explanations. First is what they were not good, and the genetic changes did not go far beyond human limitations. Let's face it, it's pretty unlikely, Herc said, watching his men lay him down on the handcuffed arms. The stretcher had been modified. His head was almost in complete suspension, with nothing to lean on. Not only that, but they also tied him to the biceps area of the stretcher, as well as his legs. And the second is that you're not so normal either. I hope you don't mind, but I took some samples of your blood, Hirk said, standing next to where the ancient was lying, watching the cold, murderous look the blonde sent him. He couldn't quite explain, it wasn't fear, but feeling of uneasiness plagued his chest. He looked into those ice blue eyes. A slight distress struck his throat. You may be resistant to pain, I presume, but you would have to breathe, he said, nodding to his men. One of them put a plastic bag around his head and pulled it slightly down from his neck, hanging him. Ghost struggled as he felt his windpipe being squeezed, his muscles twitching as the hanging took place. This went on for several more minutes until the guard removed the plastic bag from the agent's head. Ghost took a few deep breaths, only to regain and grit his teeth, and squirmed as he felt his body being electrocuted. The noise of electricity seemed to rupture his ears. His burning blue eyes stared at the restraints that bound to him by the stretcher. The lights flickered a few times until everything stopped. He let himself fall into the stretcher and breathed heavily. His eyes focused on the ceiling above. So you're ready to talk? Who do you work for? Hirk said. But after a few seconds of not getting an answer, not even a sideways glance, he just nodded to his men to keep on the torturing section. Again, he was hung and electrocuted. With each section, hanging time and power of electricity increased. Blood and saliva and sweat lined the plastic bag to his face, almost entirely. His chest was also rising and falling with some force in a rapid rhythm, and his eyes were almost closing. Hirk then took a few steps away, leaned against the side of the granary, looking up to the agent's face. Things are only going to get worse. Do you really want to spend the last moments of your life being hung and tortured and electrocuted in a dark room? Hirk said, and that was even that Ghost turned his head to face him, his tired eyes staring into the two men's chorus ones. For a few moments, Hirk then even thought of getting some answer after all those moments. Do you? Ghost asked, his gruff voice piercing like daggers to the side of Hirk's head. It was all very quick and almost a blink of an eye. The ancient then headbutted Hirk in the nose and threw himself forward, caring a little about the terror of his skin, after being bristling by the restraints that were around his biceps, or his deformed hand. It was a result of dislocating his fingers to get out of handcuffs. Spinning his bodies around, he hits the kick to the side of the neck, and one of the guards pushes the stretcher out towards another. Quickly, they leaped over the fingers of the stretcher and kicked to the man's chest, causing him to crash back into the concrete. The agent turned around at the same instant Hirk acted. He was hit with the punch to the face, followed by one to his chest. However, the ancient blocked the third punch and landed a strong blow to the man's throat, causing him to choke and immediately bring his head to the hit spot. Throwing Hirk onto the ground with a kick, Ghost turns around to the two guards. The one of them who had tied them to the stretcher tried to stab him. However, the ancient dodged the attack and countered with the hook to the man's chin, followed by a left jab, causing the guard to be stunned. Without stopping there, he takes the knife and throws it at Hirk's leg. The man howled in pain as he felt the blade sink all the way to his thigh. Ghost kicked the man in front of him to the ground, turning around to the guard responsible for carrying out the torture. Just like the other, he ran towards him with the knife. However, as soon as he approached, Ghost grabbed him and bent it to the side, and with some force broke it. The sound of bone breaking was not heard by anyone, but because of the guard's cry of pain, the scream didn't last long since Ghost hit him with 2 consecutive punches to the liver, which made the man run out of air and hit the ground immediately. However, Ghost didn't let him fall. He forced the man to stand up and threw him against the stretcher, turning the torture device on the full blast, watching the man's body twitch for a few moments. Then the agent turned around, with the knife in hand, killed the guard who was on the floor. His eyes then went to Hirk, who had crawled towards the door in futile attempt to escape. However, when he saw the ancient approaching, he stopped, stared deep into the blue eyes that seemed to be penetrating his soul. He just stood there, as if he had accepted his fate. He said nothing, nor did he move. What he should say? One of those cliched movie lines when a villain is about to lose? Why would he move? No matter how hard he might try, the agent would just catch up with him. Ghost pulled the knife that was stuck in the man's thigh without taking his eyes off the pathetic scene in front of him. "You should have killed me," Ghost said, shaking his head slightly with one hand, removing his wet hair from the side of his left eye. He felt uncomfortable without his mask, but at the moment he admitted that it was good that he wasn't wearing it. "Who operates this asylum? Who is Frederick Downing?" Ghost said. Ed, playing the body with the knife between his fingers, his cold voice causing shivers to run through Kirk's body. The man himself gasped a little, looked reluctant for a few moments, and swallowed some saliva before answering. "Figure it out yourself, I won't say anything," Kirk said, reaching for something inside his shirt. "I don't think you will, though," he said, showing the device in his hand. Ghost arched an eyebrow and looked around. Nothing seemed to have happened. From the look of Herc's face, that was a problem. Not wanting to stand there any longer, Ghost sighed. The knife seemed to glow in his hand, now motionless. "Too bad," he said, just before he plunged the knife to the side of Kirk's abdomen, tore into his stomach with one swift, fluid, brutal motion. Kirk didn't even scream properly because he watched his guts literally spill out of his stomach. His whole body began to shake. His restless hands didn't even know whatever tried to put the guts back in or to avoid touching them. The shock consumed him. Slowly he went to the ground, while his body was still trembling. Ghost got up and decided to leave this room as soon as possible, not wanting to be there for the last moments of that trash. Let him die alone. However, before he could leave the place, the device was now on the floor beeped, and the door of the room locked. Ghost turned around quickly, and his eyes turned around, expecting the room to start filling with gas. However, to his surprise, what happened to the floor simply opened up from the center. Everything in that room fell into the dark preset. The agent gritted his teeth as he slid down that large tube that went lower and lower, what seemed like minutes descending through the place. He finally found himself in free fall and braced for the impact. Ghost grunted as he felt his body hit the ground. The sound of the thud and the bodies against the ground echoed through a seemingly empty place. He stood up quickly, ignoring the pain dominated the side of his body. He looked down at the arm and sighed, slightly relieved to see that he had not dislocated anything, or worse, broken it. He looked up, observing the tube which he came. His eyes went down and ran through the room that he was in. It looked more like some kind of barbaric prison. There was a rusty iron door, what appeared to be a cell. To the right was a corridor with rubble blocking the way to the right. A corridor that was only a few lamps hardly worked anymore. In the lower parts of the surrounding walls were small tunnels with small amounts of water flowing. A prison and a sewer, apparently. Before the agent could even think of what to do, a roar echoed throughout the place, an extremely close-up of a frightening roar. Ghost got into attack position with the knife, ran his eyes around with some distress. The roar was close and seemed to have come from all directions at once. The sound of footsteps completely consumed him. It seemed as if several creatures were walking around him. The sound of something behind him made him turn around quickly. His eyes barely able to follow one of the guards' bodies was pulled up towards the small sewer tunnels. Ghost began to move slowly towards the dimly lit corridor. His eyes gazed in that direction, but his whole body attentive to the slightest movement that occurred there. The moment his foot touched the ground, the sound of something striking metal made itself present beside him. His eyes widened and turned to the door of the rusty cell just in time. From the cell, a huge humanoid creature appeared, as if it was coming from out of the ceiling. The creature was at least 2 meters tall, and its skin was grayish. Its eyes were pale with almost pulsating red veins. Its skin of his mouth no longer existed, which gave the agent rather grotesque view of the creature chewing on the dead guard's flesh. Its hands were huge instead of fingers, something that looked like tentacles with its claws on the end. The guard's upper body was only supported by his exposed spine. The creature devoured the flesh and organs with ferocity and speed, its eyes never leaving the agent's. "What a cute little pet," Ghost muttered, watching the creature let go of the guard's body, and breathed heavily, as if it were smelling him. Blind, perhaps? It didn't seem to be the case, but from what the pale eyes, he could tell that the creature did have some trouble seeing. Ghost locked his jaw when he saw the tentacles of the creature of the hand move. Something had to begin to grow. A large, huge claw formed right before his eyes. The ancient looked briefly at the body of the guard at the creature's feet. It had ingested mass to create mass, similar to how the G-virus acted. Damn! The creature ran towards him, and the agent's pupils began to dilate. With its left hand, the creature tried to grab the agent, who dodged by throwing himself to the ground, sliding under the attack. However, even with the creature's legs that were facing, the thing's torso rotated almost 180 degrees, striking the ancient with the back of its huge hand. Ghost gritted his teeth and threw his torso back, feeling the tip of the creature's claw cut into his abdomen. He stepped away, turning his body and looking away at his new wound. Not deep but wide, but probably would leave a small scar. The creature attacked him again, and attacked with both hands in an attempt to crush him. However, the ancient jumped to the side and advanced towards the creature. He stabbed the knife into the monster's head, hearing what some kind of roar in pain. However, his attack seemed to have no effect, that as the tentacles of the infected's left hand grabbed onto the torso and lifted him into the air. What the instant Ghost saw would appear to be a heart in the center of the creature's back, but before he could do anything, he was thrown to the ground, causing him to grunt in pain and spit out some saliva mixed with blood. The creature lifted him into the air again, with a huge claw present in its other hand, tried to pierce the agent. However, Ghost reacted before monster could even move. He stabbed the blade into one of the tentacles of the creature's hand, pulled his arm violently from to the side, cutting off the tentacle and forcing the creature to release him in reflex. He fell to the ground but soon tried to get back up. The creature, despite the attack, realized this, and in an attempt to leave him on the ground, kicked him strongly in the stomach. So hard that the agent fell, thrown backwards, and slid across the floor for a few seconds. Ghost spat out some saliva mixed with blood, feeling the metallic taste dominate his mouth. He wiped his lips with the back of his hand and looked at the monster. The creature leapt into the ceiling where it hung its tentacles and quickly went forward towards the agent. Ghost dodged it by rolling his body towards it and stood up quickly. He had full confidence that he would kill the creature with just one knife, now that he had discovered possible weakness. However, the creature was too fast and agile for him to deal with it with such an open space. The monster stood up and ran towards him. Ghost did the same, one and ran at the head of the school. Just as the creature was about to attack him, the ancient threw himself to the ground and slid underneath the creature's legs, getting up quickly and running towards the corridor. The creature quickly turned around and started running towards the agent. The thing was fast, but not fast enough to catch up with the blonde man. When he reached to the end of the corridor, he turned around right after, seeing that grate blocked the path to his left, and keep running until he reached slightly more open area. To his right there was a broken door, also rusty, that led to a room with some sort of lawn that appeared to be an office or something similar. Because of the rusty old metal cabinets, the floor of that place was similar to the floor of the laboratory. Perhaps a ward that probably had some time to go, but because of that creature following him, or because of some sort of small outbreak that happened, had been abandoned and used as disposable of bodies. If he was right and that monster was infected with the G-virus, it certainly might have been a relatively young creature, since it hadn't grown so much in mass, unlike Birkin. The agent would keep on running. However, he heard a very strange roar coming from the creature, followed by an unknown noise. He looked back for a brief moment. Probably a good thing he did, as the tentacles of the creature's hand were thrown in his direction. He tried to dodge, managing to dodge with one of his hands. However, the tentacles of the creature's left had grabbed him by the arm and began to pull him towards the monster. Ghost grunted in irritation and distress, viciously stabbing the tentacles in an attempt to break free. The infected humanoid creature leapt towards him, knocking the agent to the ground. Both his hands held his shoulders, and the creature opened its mouth with sharp teeth to bite him. However, Ghost pulled his legs up and pressed them against the creature's throat as it struggled. At one point, he managed to move his arm and drop the knife into the center of the creature's forehead. With the opportunity created, Ghost broke free from the grip and threw himself to the side, standing up quickly and stabbing the knife into the heart of the creature present in the back. The monster roared loudly in pain. Its body contorted until the creature saw its muscles pulsing. The creature attacked the man quickly, striking him in the torso, sending him straight to that abandoned room. Ghost almost grunted both from the attack and from the impact of the body on the floor. The creature roared again, seemingly to grow in size and at a greater speed than before. It lunged towards the fallen agent, destroying the concrete of the doorway like it was nothing. Seeing the creature's huge hand coming towards him, the agent rolled to the side, watching him for a few moments as the crack had formed onto the floor. He jumped quickly and still in the air, taking momentum off the wall. He launched himself towards the creature's back, again plunging his knife into his beating heart. Blood flowed out in abundance. The creature roared again, and its body pulsed almost entirely. Ghost jumped out of the way as the creature threw itself onto the wall in an attempt to crush against the concrete. The man took a few steps back away, and the creature looked at him, as if in anger, even with its pale eyes. "Sorry, my hand slipped," he said loudly, adopting an almost a smug expression, clearly in defiance, in an attempt to provoke the creature. He noticed that thing certainly had the level of intelligence. Perhaps the result in one of those experiments created that intelligent biological weapon gone wrong? All things considered, it was likely. The monster then ran towards the agent again and attacked it with its huge claw. The man dodged it by throwing his body down. However, the creature didn't stop there. It attacked viciously in an attempt to slash an attack from top to bottom. The agent dodged by throwing himself to the side, but it had no opening to counterattack. Since the monster threw its body own into that direction, exactly what he should not act. The thing he already knew he was aiming at his heart, and this was everything he'd keep from reaching it. As the agent assumed, the monster was intelligent. However, all like the other monsters he has killed, he had also had that thing that would be consumed by primitive instincts. Not least, if this theory was right and it was a failed experiment, he didn't have emotional control to suppress his own instincts. The creature attacked again, a large motion with its huge arm from left to right. The agent dodged it by sliding under the creature's legs and watched as the monster again destroyed the concrete like it was nothing. On the bright side, however, he had found an opening. Leaping towards one of the old chairs there, he leapt onto the monster's back and viciously stabbed his heart. The adrenaline was running fast, and his heart was pounding, as loud as drums in his ears. The creature roared loudly and struggled violently, but the agent continued to stab, not only caring about the blood splash in his face, watching how strangely that heart pulsed. It was almost as if it had a life of its own, and its heart itself was reacting to the pain. Ghost was taken by surprise. Before he tried to jump away, the tentacles of the hands grabbed his arms and wouldn't let him escape, and the creature jumped down and let itself fall backwards to the ground, causing Ghost to gasp heavily as he felt all the weights on his body and the impact of his back against the ground. But his pain was only momentarily, and the adrenaline had not let him go affected by this. Quickly, as soon as the creature stood up, he was already on its back again, stabbing viciously as before. The monster struggled violently as its feet moving without realizing which direction they were going, just trying to get the plague off its back. As it struggled, it left a trail of destruction in its path. The concrete walls were not strong enough to withstand its violent blows. Ghost, then seeing that the creature was approaching the wall again, climbed up to the creature's shoulders and jumped down with a kick to the creature's head, watching the monster crash itself onto the concrete. The whole place shook. A noise, amongst the roars and grunts of the monster in front of him, caught the agent's attention. His dilated blue eyes ran over the place where he was, clearly unexplored and even finished area. From the rather flimsy beams, and considering the collapse that he had seen earlier, he would see that area at the risk of collapse. For a few moments he observed the beams nearby, and a small smile broke out of his lips. "Ah, you look so cute when you're angry," he teased, looking into the eyes of the creature, which roared again and attacked him fiercely. Ghost moved and using the beams as a reference. The monster attacked and roared, looking increasingly frustrated that it could never reach its prey, no matter how hard it attacked. As another beam was destroyed, a loud noise echoed throughout the place. The entire area seemed to shake. That's when Ghost quickly took off, running as fast as he could back down the hall. The monster tried to follow him, but could even not take a first step before being knocked down by a collapsing ceiling. Concrete, dirt, and metal beams fell on the creature, burying it alive. Its roar became muffled until it was completely silent. Ghost had to move a little further away as the collapse was spread further. After a few moments, the entire room, even a bit of the corridor, had collapsed as a cloud of dust caused Ghost to cough a little and close his eyes. When the dust had settled, he looked at what was left of the place. A small round of concrete and sand had formed in front of him. Part of the walls of the corridor had been taken away by an avalanche of debris. No part of that monster was visible as far as he could tell. The thing was completely consumed by any luck, and it would either be dead or be there for a long time before it could free itself. The adrenaline left his body. Ghost grunted as he slowly bent down. His hand went towards his abdomen and gasped. The torture, the falls, the blows, it had all built up, and he felt pain all at once. Blood began to trickle down the side of his mouth, but he just ignored it. His eyes were focused elsewhere. In the destroyed wall of the corridor and for the small tunnel, too small for that monster to pass through, but large enough for him to move without feeling trapped. The agent took a few deep breaths, and looked back. Corridor after corridor, some of the corridors hadn't been accessed because something was blocking the way. Whatever it was, a metal grate too strong for him to break through, or crumbling debris. He felt his vision blurred. He needed a place to rest now. At a slower pace than he would have liked, he walked towards the tunnel and crouched down, beginning to crawl throughout the dark place. At one point the tunnel widened, making it possible for him to stand upright. It looked like a small forgotten cave. After a while of walking, he reached a partially destroyed wall, only leaving the medium-sized gap to what lay beyond. Ghost slid slightly, as he what appeared to be ventilation ducts, along with power cables and some grinds that left the white lab on the floor somewhat visible. The agent swallowed some saliva, feeling common metallic taste. He was thirsty. Running a hand through his purposely long hair, much to William's chagrin, he had sat down on the floor and braced his back against the wall. As if there were any creatures out there, he would surely have attacked them by now. And since the tunnel was so small, even if the monster were alive, it wouldn't be able to reach him. He leaned his head against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. It was very rare when he took some time to rest on the mission. In fact, he would say this was the first time, because he was even had the opportunity to rest for a while. Something happened that prevented him from just doing that. While he was so able to the first time he was captured by the enemy, maybe he had been too careless. But considering that the soldiers were no ordinary humans, he would have to say he was lucky to be still alive, even if that was a plus. In a way, both grateful and distressed for this. Grateful that his body needed at least a few moments of rest. Distressed because it felt like his mind was drifting. His mind was really always busy. Whatever was focused on training, the mission, or the reports that he had reviewed together without Hunk. His days were full of gave room for anything else related to work. He had become so involved in those fights that at some point he began to fight for himself, and not because he was forced to. A part of him wanted to do this. Maybe it was just because he'd gotten used to that routine. He had gotten used to the fights, but a part of him wanted to do it. Another part he didn't know. And maybe before he knew it, he had fallen asleep. Ghost woke up sometime later, a little scared and even confused. He had fallen asleep on the job. His heart beat faster as he stood up suddenly, grunting softly as he felt his body still aching. Although the pain was still there, he was not so tired, which meant that he had slept for a considerable amount of time. He still had to finish the mission as quickly as possible. As Ghost positioned himself in front of the wall in one swift moment, kicked the fragile stone wall, opening a passage for him to move through. Once he had done so, he had walked towards the grid in front of him. He couldn't see much through the grid, but it is what appeared to be a corridor. Stayed like that for a few moments, watching the area below. It was silent. No one heard him around the moment. Closing his eyes for a few moments, he revealed his goal. He had to destroy the lab. Without his equipment, it became 2-3 times more difficult. However, he knew a way. Considering that there was a bioweapon in the basement of the lab, he could say that there were a few in incubation, and surely they had a safety protocol in that place if all one of the bioweapons escaped. He had to disable the initial security protocols and activate the lab's self-destruct, in case if they didn't have one, to which it would be kind of stupid with dealing with those viruses. He would have to figure something out. He would certainly find one. Destroying it was the easiest part. He slowly moved the grating out of place and leaned down, watching the corridor. Seeing that there had been no one around, he would say that it was close to, or time that shift would change, which in that case was about to dawn, which had meant that time limit for the completion of the mission was dangerously short. He jumped through the corridor and looked both ways down the hallway, seeing that there was no one there. He had focused on the direction of the noise nearby. Whatever it was, made his way to the right. He passed through a few doors, finding not much of anything most of them. However, anyone in particular caught his attention. There was a table near the wall with several chairs facing the board with the papers to it. A meeting room apparently, however. What caught his attention was the equipment on the table. Hirsch must have left it there temporarily when he looked in the torture room. He entered the room and ran to his equipment, putting on his shot vest, analyzing the knife that it was in his shelf, and he knew he had missed his companion. He picked up his radio and pushed one of the buttons and placed the pistol in his holster. "Ghost to HQ! On the wire," he asked, moving towards the door again, watching the hallway, making sure no one was around. "HQ to Ghost. What happened to you? We monitor your location through the clip, but we haven't been able to get any contact with you," the voice of his men said, and Ghost shook his head slightly. "Yes, there was a setback. They threw some welcome party for me I had to attend, and then I had to escape from an angry pet," he said, looking around the room. He was in for a few moments, and he needed to act. "What about the progress of the mission? Time is running out." William's kind of anxious to speak, the ancient snorted. "Yes, I know I should have heard the news of my death, but can you send a helicopter?" he said, turning off the radio and exiting the room and walking down the corridor at a hurried but silent pace. As soon as he had reached the far end of the corridor, he had quickly turned his back and saw 2 scientists approaching. He ran his eyes around, not seeing any place he could use to run and hide. He ran, jumped, and took a leap back towards the wall, hanging from one of the tubes that ran along the ceiling. The 2 scientists walked past him, without the thinking possibility of manipulating both viruses before application. Ghost just stood there motionless, absorbing the information. When they were far enough away, he let himself fall back into the corridor, and this time he followed, since they were probably heading for the wing of the laboratory. Minutes later, he had reached another corner of another corridor, hiding himself. Tilting his body slightly to the side, he saw 2 scientists go through the double door. There were some lockers in front of that door. He had restricted the area at the end of the corridor. From the left, he had heard some muffled voices. It didn't sound like they were approaching. Moving quickly, he made his way to the left and observed the situation ahead. A guard was entering the room, what appeared to be with 2 coffee cups in hand. There was a door just ahead, what appeared to be a bathroom, and the corridor curved right just ahead of him. The ancient looked back for a few moments and then walked down the hall towards the door that the guard had just passed. As he approached, he made the slightest reaction to where he saw that he was in the control room. A large array of equipment monitors just stood there of a large window that gave a view of the movement in the room ahead. Ghost put on his hand on the door handle and remained motionless. observing the room, even though through the window of the wooden structure. The guard had already taken cups of coffee was still standing. Another one was sitting in the chair next to him, with his coffee cup already in his mouth. They were already talking about trivial, something that the agent didn't care about. He was just watching the movement of the guards without even blinking. The moment the guard went to sit down in his chair, Ghost turned the knob and slowly opened the door. Herc said that the representative would be arriving today to analyze the lab, one of the guards said, putting on his headset on his head and a coffee cup on the small table next to him. Are we going to meet the boss? Why was I not notified? The other asked, both obvious to the agent's presence. Before the man could respond, Ghost did, stabbing the knife in both necks in just a second, pushing the bodies to the ground. Now it was a matter of time for the magic to happen. The scientists watched the process of manipulating highly voltage virus that certainly eagerness. The subjects were used and mutating this unexpected patterns. The data were in line of some sort of finished subjects were tested, still in the glass tubes, all directly enveloped in the brain. And what seemed to be just another way of working in the shadows became a real chaos from the matters of moments. The glass tanks opened and the doors unlocked. The lights went out. The scientists were taken by surprise to the unexpected events. The first scream echoed throughout the place when one of the creatures advanced towards the scientists near one of the glass tanks. The automatic voice echoed through the scene. Alert! Bioweapon organism out of the containment. The soldiers were alerted, but as seconds passed, their system crashed. The controls did not seem to work, and within minutes the lab was infested. The lights flickered, the doors malfunctioned, and the agent was responsible for all the chaos, walking towards one of the exits he had discovered while looking away at the facility's map. There were other entrances and exits in total, one by the elevator that led to one of Herc's offices, and another one through the prison, which was the way he had entered in the first place, and finally another one through the huge ladder that led up to a huge garage a few hundred meters from the prison, next to the dirt road that ran through the entire facility. Attention, self-destruct system activated. Please follow security protocols and flee the premises, the automatic voice announced, and a small sneering smile, Ghost walked through the last electronic door of the facility. He had turned around, reached for that same device from before. The door closed and locked, breaking down shortly after. Other than the other door, he had locked the other two doors around the control room before he left. In other words, everyone was in there was trapped. Ghost turned in a certain corridor he had passed through the common metal door. He then began to climb through the huge ladder. In front of them was some speed. He wanted to get away from there as soon as possible. Not only that, but he had to find a good place to watch the fireworks show that was about to take place. What he didn't notice was a pair of black guys, wearing a red dress, was monitoring him from afar. He walked away from the place just before the huge explosion.